Global Order. I am Hindol Sengupta. I'm delighted that Dr. Gautam Sen has joined me. Dr. Sen has been on Global Order many times on various issues. 3 decades in the London School of Economics, teaching international economy. Best place to talk about the mother of all trade deals, the India-EU trade deal. And very specifically, the one thing people are talking about, Mercedes cars and Audi cars and wines and cheeses. But the most important aspect of this deal is defense, defense, defense. To talk about all of that and why this could be India's breakout moment in defense manufacturing with this mega deal, which even the defense minister said might help in the EU's re-arm initiative. All of that, to talk about all of that is Gautam Sen. Here's Gautam Sen. Dr. Sen, welcome. Your first impression of this mother of all trade deals.
Thank you for inviting me to speak on the subject, Hindol. Mother of all treaties actually is not a bad description. It is truly a historic treaty. And I'm looking back and thinking this may have been the most important trade and security treaty India has signed since independence in 1947. I can't think of a more important one. Of course, there were global treaties, but those were issue-specific. And this, I think, exceeds in importance any other significant treaty. We have important relationships. The relationship with Soviet Union and Russia remains of great importance to India. Our relationship with the United States, though troubled now, will always remain a major factor in India's international relations. But this is actually, if I may put it in a colloquial way, rather a big deal. The government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi is to be congratulated for pulling this off in relatively short order after, I believe, a whole decade of negotiations. If I may say so, ultimately, the person who really needs to be thanked is none other than President Donald Trump. He is the one who has catalyzed the speed with which all of this has been accomplished, as he did with India's quote-unquote free trade accord with the United Kingdom. Now, stepping back and looking at the larger perspective, beyond the specifics of the tariffs and economic agreements, defense and security, is that there is, because of the changed circumstances, a review of relations between India and the European Union, and something which actually analytically ought to have been obvious for a long time. In historical terms, there is a significant convergence of interests between the European Union and India. There are no major conflicts between these two oversized polities. The 27 of the European Union and India. And it is a bit of a mystery as to why this did not occur to both parties much earlier. But I think the urgency of the circumstances may account for that, since it has now happened. Now, the European Union is collectively, in some respects, almost equal of the United States. We together comprise 25% of world GDP, but our international trade has been smaller than it ought to have been. But some of the most controversial and difficult issues appear to have been overcome. For example, the Indian government could not negotiate on agricultural products and dairy products, and that has been excluded. And this was a sticking point on discussions with the United States. But the European Union has long experience of its own protectionist common agricultural policy. I think they would have grasped the issue of angry farmers in France and angry farmers in Punjab and West UP. So this was, I think, the difficult one. I can't recall what happened to the issue of basmati rice definition being extended across the border from India. This was a sticking point earlier. But in the scheme of things, that must have been very minor. It is a little bit surprising that the scale of the tariff reductions are quite so large. And yes, they will be staggered over time. They're not going to happen overnight. You will still have to pay at least 30% duty on wine if people are concerned about their imbibing French and Italian Merlot or whatever it is that they like to drink. I fear Audi cars will appear certainly in the garages of the Indian rich. But that, I believe, is also staggered, as in the case of the United Kingdom, that the lowering of the duties will not be immediate. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But really, the most important is, provided the 27 states consent, because this has to go to the Commission of the European Parliament. The real big coup for India is a political and economic one, which is that the difficulties being experienced by key sectors of the Indian economy, which are politically of great importance, textiles in particular, but also gems, jewelry, marine products. These will have 0% access to the European market, I believe, early next year. This is significant because I think the Indian exporter will carry the pain of the loss of the American market for another year. If they know where the situation is headed, in particular, what the American super tariffs had accomplished was to create huge uncertainty. This was what I think worried people, whether to invest, whether to sign contracts, because production orders, etc., will take months to organize. And I'm sure all of this will begin very quickly because there are relationships. We are not talking about the scale. And I think it will very quickly dwarf the losses Indian exporters have suffered in the American market. So this is all for the good, politically very good for the government, economically very good for people across India, because textiles are important for states from across India, whether it's Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu. All of these states will benefit. And the zero tariff means, we are no longer at a disadvantage to countries like Bangladesh, which used to have least developed country status and a lower tariff on clothing. So all of that is wiped clean. We will still have to compete with other countries, which are very competitive, including China and, say, Vietnam. But we are in a very good position. And India's economy of scale in textile and the output of particular varieties of skilled products, from carpets to other types of things, not so much poly, but various varieties, are actually quite uniquely Indian, and they do have an advantage in foreign markets. The question is, what can we scale up? Can Indian producers? And I have met in the last 6 months various members of Indian textile producers, the association, and I have to say their understanding of global markets and their ability to explain, for example, compliance regulations was very impressive. So they really have now understood how the global market works. And in the end, the Indian market, I think, and the producers will compete on quality and price. And this really is very good news. Textile, I think, is the second biggest employer in India. And India used to be an even bigger exporter once upon a time, and it was overtaken particularly by China and Bangladesh, which enjoyed these tariff advantages. All of that is somewhat behind us. China still remains a very competitive producer, if only because of scale and quality. But India is catching up, and also, as I said, there are varieties of product in which we are very good. So I'm very happy to see that this has been accomplished, and so quickly. Then I am a little bit surprised that despite the troubles of European iron and steel, this is going to be subject to zero tariff in not the very distant future. Chemicals, leather products. So all this is for the good. I'm not really interested in the tariff levels because they are actually coming down from fairly substantial levels to low levels. I think some of these are proposals which I think will continue to be discussed and negotiated. But Mr. Piyush Goyal, our Commerce Minister, and his team have obviously done a great deal of excellent homework, and he too is to be congratulated. But overall, the Indian government has grounds to be very pleased with itself, and I could see that on the faces of officials and indeed our senior minister at the press conference. So congratulations indeed are merited. Now, the defense and security part is a very interesting one. But before I go to that, I want to make one
question about that, Dr. Sen, which is that obviously one of the things that the EU is looking for, especially after the gaps that have been shown in the war between Russia and Ukraine, is that essentially in many ways their stockpiling, their basic armaments, their ammunition needs to be fast-tracked at a whole new level. And there is perhaps no country trustworthy in the world, barring America, with whom EU has a difficult relationship today, barring America, the only other country that can deliver this is India. China could, but of course the EU doesn't want those kind of ties with China. India is the only place which can deliver armaments and ammunition at the scale, and dare one say, in some cases, even with the technology that the EU wants.
I think India will hesitate to supply armaments for use in the Ukraine. This is highly unlikely. Our relationship with Russia is a very durable and long-standing one, and we have grounds to feel confident that this is a relationship which will endure, like our relationship increasingly with Israel. So I doubt that. But our defense modernization will definitely get a boost because of the economic relationship alone. There will be many issues which can be addressed because we will be closer as economies. So the defense and political issues will be easier to tackle. But India ultimately wants two things, both in defense and in the wider economy, is indigenization and technology transfer. And that has been a long-standing demand, wish of successive Indian governments. And I think particularly the incumbent Modi government really wants indigenization, domestic production. A great deal of progress has been made. And in fact, we saw some of that in the recent conflict with Pakistan. Indigenously manufactured, in fact, not even very high-tech equipment proved its mettle. But I think a very important leap in modernization is being dictated by the changes happening in China. Our modernization is not modernization per se, but modernization in a very competitive world, and therefore the relationship with the European Union, which is certainly advanced in many areas. And I notice that we are talking about cooperation, cybersecurity. This will become a matter of enormous importance, but the cyber warfare is already showing that it can be a very effective tool of warfare. And there is every reason to believe that cooperation on this will be able to address issues more quickly and more deeply and more extensively. And we really need to tackle this. And I think the government is very much aware. And the Europeans have an interest in cooperating with India because we are quite strong in some areas. We have the numbers in terms of technicians and technologies who can deal with the multiplicity of problems.
It was mentioned even in the sidelines of this deal that India can produce at scale, things like ammunition, things like drones. You mentioned cybersecurity in many areas which may not necessarily be absolutely cutting edge, but where things are needed in good quality and in volume. As this re-arm initiative of the EU unfolds, India is one place where large-scale deliveries can come from. And the technology transfer that we see, what we give in turn is this scale, which many European nations cannot find anywhere else but in India.
And that is, of course, true. There are many sectors, particularly ammunition, in which India actually at one time suffered shortages, and now we have overcome that. In fact, we are the exporter of ammunition, etc. But in defense production, market size matters a great deal. And because the R&D component of high-tech defense equipment is very large, the more units you produce, the lower the average cost of the individual item. So if India's participation enlarges the size of the market for critical items, certainly aircraft, the R&D costs, the very high R&D costs, can be defrayed over a larger number of units. So this will be very beneficial because defense is becoming a very costly affair, both for the European Union, India, and other countries too. So this market size mitigates the cost factor by the possibility of manufacturing many more units. Maybe not everything can be shared, but if there is sufficient trust, and indeed we have seen that in the case of fighter aircraft, the most advanced in Europe are Rafale, there has been no issue. And there are other areas in which joint production, and indeed I would have thought some of the production may move to India on cost grounds, because the technology input in terms of the numbers of technology employed could be much larger in India and cheaper, definitely, as it will be with vehicles. It is not necessarily the case that Audi will export cars from Germany. Audi is manufactured in many other parts of the world, and they may well decide that a larger volume should be manufactured in India. I have said this on an earlier program with regard to our relationship with the UK and imports of alcohol and cars. India is a very competitive producer, a mid to low segment. I think others will have a hard time in competing with India because of cost alone. I was noticing there was a Toyota which looked actually rather like an oversized SUV, and the base price was 9 lakh rupees or so, which is about 7,200 pounds. I don't know of any car being manufactured for this price. And these cars are becoming increasingly sophisticated and high-tech, have many things added on which are making them attractive. So, on cost grounds, lower and middle segment will be very hard to break into. There will always be a market for Audis and Mercs and Lexus and other cars. But European cars, particularly German cars. And maybe they will sell, particularly the high-tech one, which cannot be manufactured in volume in India, will be sold to India. But this is not happening straight away. And the Indian car industry is getting stronger by the day. The quality of Indian cars is improving. And you can see that in the roads, a lot of very high-tech cars. And India is a very competitive producer and seller in Africa, for example. Bajaj is a major seller of motor vehicles in Africa. It has outcompeted China. So we need to be confident. And I think the opening of the global market is teaching us many new things, quality control. And so I'm not worried about that. And also for alcohol, I think, Indian alcohol is improving in quality. And on price, the medium and lower segment won't necessarily go for expensive French wine. There will always be a market for expensive things. And India is a large enough market for that to be worthwhile for the Europeans. But there's a great deal of prospect. We are complementary economies by and large. We are not competitors. We are not manufacturing similar things. We are complementary. So a great deal of economic efficiency can be achieved. I think they're talking about $30 billion worth of reduction tariff, which actually I think is on the lower estimate in the medium term. I think we will exceed that. And the most important thing which is underlying all of this is the scale of the mistrust of the global economy, which is not going to be there between the European Union and India, because I think circumstances make it imperative for us to think rationally about possibilities rather than ideologically and in narrow, irrational nationalist terms. But underlying all of this treaty is very important because in a way it rings a bell for the end of the WTO. With 1/4 of the world economy now integrated as one single market pretty much over the next 5 to 7 years, the WTO's significance, unfortunately, will be diminished. Is that a bad thing? Well, I think it really doesn't matter. It is something circumstances have dictated, and we have done the wise thing. Other countries may join with the European Union and make trade deals, and this will complicate matters for us because they will also want to export from the European Union to us. That includes China. China may use Europe as a platform, as they will use the United Kingdom as a platform. And I think we're already concerned about that, and I've been warning about this for a couple of years, that this will be an issue. I think we'll work it out. The gains are potentially so large that we will work it out.
Especially in things like EVs, Dr. Sen, in electric vehicles and so on and so forth.
Again, China's cost advantages are significant in electric vehicles, as in many other products.
Okay.
And though they suffer some disadvantages in terms of technology and ability compared to, say, Tesla and now the Germans, they have the advantages of scale. And huge indirect state subsidies flow into all these key sectors. They have really subsidized them in many, many different ways. We have to work out how we can deal with this. But I'm confident that Indian producers, as I've just said, will rise to the challenge. And this is all for the good because, in our country, we have a slightly misleading conviction that we have a very large pool of young labor. Unlike many others, this, in fact, is a mistaken view, I would suggest, because our very large pool of labor is not very productive. If you have a huge pool of labor and productivity is low, you are gaining very little. What you really want is a much more productive labor force, and we are way behind China and many other countries in the region. So it's not numbers which matter, it is how productive your labor force is, because that will dictate their living standards. Per capita income depends on productivity, and we keep saying we have a lot of labor. Our labor is very low productivity, and that is no good. And I'm sure your friend and the astute analyst Manish Sabarwal will happily elaborate on this subject. So we need more vocational training if you're to take advantage of this very high quality vocational training. This is possible, it's complicated, and the organizational issues are not easy to address, but I have seen it being done 20 years ago in Delhi itself, of companies which are engaged in vocational training. Government is very much alive to this now, much effort is being made, but we should try much harder. But I think on the security front, it's wider security front, I am certain that the Ministry of Defense, DRDO and others are looking carefully at all the areas in which we can cooperate to mutual benefit. You're right, we will export certain things like ammunition and we will induct technology. And I think the cost issues will persuade both countries and both Europe and the Indians to think very rationally. And the most important thing is we do not foresee any severe conflicts of interest between us. The issue of Ukraine is not really anything which concerns us. We can play a role as mediator, if only because the Russians trust India's good faith, and also because the European Union has been dragged into this war by the United States at very high cost to itself. And I'm sure they want to get out, buy cheap energy, and to revive the economies, and the Germans want to get their manufacturing restarted. So India can play a sophisticated role. Other questions like Iran are really somewhat remote. India does not wish to fall out with any Indian regime for ideological reasons, for public relations. We have a very important relationship with Iran, which is why India voted in the UN the way it did. It is regrettable because some things are happening which are morally reprehensible, but India has nothing to gain by poking its nose because it will not benefit the Iranian people. It will only harm our interests in Iran, Chabar, Afghanistan. So we are playing a very complicated and sophisticated game. I think the most important issue that India has in all of this, that we have inherited a multiplicity of cross-cutting cleavages and opportunities. And I have to say, our External Affairs Minister is showing mastery over it all, and something really to watch with pleasure. And the one thing that I think we are not about to lose, that we are not losing our moral compass. We are not giving up on our moral view of the world, though constrained by circumstance. and people on the whole trust us. We have no grand ambitions for domination, etc. Our regional problems are mainly sponsored by external powers to discomfort us. So these are not problems which originate in India with Bangladesh or even Pakistan, or indeed even Nepal or Sri Lanka. These originate outside, and we have to hold steady, to hold the moral ground that we do not intend harm, and we would like to cooperate. We were very generous to Bangladesh. If you look at all the data, we reached out, and it is not wrong for India to have wanted Bangladesh not to be an enemy. This was reasonable for India to have a friendly Bangladesh. Anyway, that's another story, but having the European Union alongside gives us wider diplomatic heft, and I think it's great. And
I ask you, Dr. Sen, some have speculated, and I certainly agree to a degree, this will also iron out some of the some countries of the EU's moral posturing towards India. I mean, that has been a thorn in the flesh of this relationship too. Of course, it's taken 18 years to get this deal done, but in recent years, this has been a bit of a thorn in our flesh, this unnecessary EU moral posturing on issues that are really intricately tied to India's national security.
What happens in the media is one matter, and the media in Germany and France, Poland are very unreasonable and tendentious about particularly Kashmir. And this really outrages Indians, quite justly in my view. But ultimately, the official position, not the media and public position, the official position in all of these countries originates in Washington. Because of Washington's politics in the region, in Pakistan, and its unhappiness with the fact that India refuses to comply with its demands, though of course we want to negotiate with the United States, because the United States will always remain, for the indefinite future, a very important economic, political, and cultural powerhouse, and there is no desire, I think, to fall out with it. But so we negotiate, but we cannot concede on things which are of fundamental importance, and they have been told these are things we cannot do. We cannot give up our dairy farmers. No government in India will survive giving up agriculture and dairy farmers. It is simply not possible. Nor will we give up on Russia. We would wish for peace in Ukraine, which it doesn't, this war doesn't suit us. It will help our stock market. It will help energy prices. Venezuela, people coming back on the world market. All of this is good for us. Peace is very good for India, which is what we crave. And we will do our bit to argue in favor, but our powers are limited in some of the arenas of conflict in the world.
But all in all, it's a very happy moment. A great mother of all trade deals has been signed, and defense is perhaps the most important core part of this deal. India's defense industry, manufacturing industry, might see an even bigger jump in the future. And of course, 25% of global GDP is addressed through this mother of all trade deals between India and the European Union. Thanks very much, Dr. Sen, for stopping by to explain all this to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hindol. Thank you.